moved all the tables. I don't know where it went. And I don't know where the best place to set the computer is, or how we plug into what we plug into. So, I don't know if Seth is back there. He was going to help. But.
So Seth, can you come up? So, you have an adapter for that guy?
I probably do. I might need multiple, so we'll see what.
That looks like that'll do it.
Looks like it's a different.
Oh,
that's
it's
a
a
VGA,
different-
but I
that's
have
a
one that goes from
DVI.
this to that. I think so. How to do this? I guess maybe I ought to just set a chair or something next to it so I can set my computer on it, or
Whose phone?
that is George's. Yeah, he was just charging it. So.
Oh, it's charged.
So let me see if I can find it. See if my other adapter will work.
Oh, he has stuff. Do you have a VGA adapter?
I don't think I have an adapter, unfortunately. So I have this, which goes into DVR, but it's got that kind of adapter. And I
No
thought I had
chance.
one that would go through, but this has got 4 prongs. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
letting it connect, and then it would go to that. So yeah, it doesn't look like we're going to have the right adapter to be able to make it work.
This actually should kind of work, but why won't it go in all the way?
It's see, there's on next to the slot. There's 4 prongs there for some reason,
Okay,
and that's
yeah.
what's blocking it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's I think it's called a Thunder connection.
I have that, but I don't have a way to connect it to the VGA. That's the problem.
What time do we start here?
What other ways can you connect to the projector? Just that? Just the VGA?
No,
Yeah. Does it have an HDMI?
in the back.
Oh, so we have to string it all the way up to it, or?
Well, you wouldn't have control of it from here. You have remote control that would go that far?
I don't know. We can try it. True, but I don't have any way to indicate to him. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we can give it a shot. You know.
Yeah, it is fine in the back. I do have the adapter at home.
Right. Right.
I'm a Mac person.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's just see what we can do back here first. And
Everything's just right back behind the screen. We threw them all away, John. Yeah, I know it was important to you, but what the hell?
took my phone. Seriously?
I have to oh, that's unusual. Normally it doesn't pop up. I have to reaccess the button.
Right,
so you're good to go.
Right on.
Well, thank you for your patience, brethren. We had to do a little Mac to PC conversion here, but I think we're all set, and John is ready to give his talk. So it's my pleasure indeed to introduce John Bridegroom. John is past master of Porter Lodge number 137 in Valparaiso, Indiana, and is currently the Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Council of Cryptic Masons for the state of Indiana. So at the national level, John currently serves as the Grand Superintendent of Indiana for the Grand Council of Allied Masonic Degrees, and as the Provincial Grand Secretary for the Provincial Grand Court of the Masonic Order of Athelstan in England, Wales, and provinces overseas. John is a graduate of the American Academy of Art in Chicago, Illinois, and is the art designer for the Journal of the Masonic Society, and worked in advertising for Franklin Company of Chicago before starting his own design company, VM Graphics, which he currently owns and operates. John and his wife Tammy are very proud of their two girls, Diva and Phoenix. So it's my pleasure to present John Bridegroom.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you're not all too sleepy from lunch. I'll do my best not to contribute to that. Before I get going, I do want to thank the Academy of Masonic Knowledge. I want to thank the Academy. I'm sure that joke's never been made before, especially George. I really appreciate you guys having me out here. It's been a blast, and I'm no stranger to Pennsylvania Freemasonry. You guys should be really proud of your state. Come out here quite a bit for different things, and Freemasonry is strong in Pennsylvania, stronger than most places that I've been. So, Brother Pohl had told a story about the young Mason who went and gave a talk on alchemy in his lodge and was shunned because it was perceived that he was the problem. Hopefully I will not suffer the same fate after I deliver this talk to you. But anyways, we'll give it a shot and see what you guys think. So, depending on who you talk to, Freemasonry has been defined as many things. I suppose inasmuch as Freemasonry is comprised of its members, that none of those can wholly be discounted. It would stand to reason that the craft is exactly what its members make it. Perhaps that's why opportunities such as these are so very important. Masonic education, as it were, is an opportunity to grow, change, and elevate what we think of this ancient fraternity. And that alone grows, changes, and elevates the royal art as a whole. Just in these few opening statements, I've referred to what we do as a fraternity, a craft, and a royal art. We use these terms often interchangeably, but they imply very different things. Currently, it's all of them in different places. It's also a spiritual journey to some. But what these labels are doing is trying to define something that its participants are still in the process of discovering. Everyone progresses at different paces, and everyone starts in different places. I would propose another description of Freemasonry that in its defining does more to liberate than to restrain. We are the world's oldest and largest fraternity. In that capacity, we care about our brethren deeply, and we look to aid them in times of need, and we look after the widows and the orphans. There's no denying that in those times we are certainly fraternal. We work on improvement lesson by lesson, slowly working to build an allegorical temple. When we practice that using the many lessons that are found in the degrees, it is most certainly a craft. We speak of the grand architect of the universe, and we focus on what awaits the immortal soul when the scythe of time calls to us. And in those times, we are embarking on a spiritual journey. We speak of the parentage of kings and noble men, and we seek the finer things in our experiences, and in that, we are developing a truly royal art. I believe that these are characteristics of our society and not its definition. I believe that they are valuable characteristics that enable us, all of us, to engage in a very real purpose no matter where we begin or where we are along the path. Freemasonry is a philosophy above all else. It is a philosophy that poses the question of whether man can, through dedicated effort and virtuous conduct, and his understanding of himself, become a master of his own life and his own destiny. Philosophy is thus defined as that. Thus defined. Philosophy is defined as all learning exclusive of technical precepts and practical arts, the sciences and liberal arts exclusive of medicine, law, and theology, the pursuit of wisdom, a search for a general understanding of values and reality by chiefly speculative rather than observational means, and the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. Now, I don't know about you, but those definitions seem nearly interchangeable with the Masonic statements made in our very ritual, which state that the liberal arts and sciences are Masonry, and that we are a speculative art, and that our search for knowledge and wisdom are our chief aims. This is important to understand as we go forward because philosophy is different from all other explanations, and that there is no obtainable answer. In fact, the answer is not the point, but the pursuit and practice of seeking is the goal. It is in the very act of searching that enlightenment is found. This is the whole point of teaching in allegory. The very reason why all mystical schools of the ancients and all religions have used this method to convey their ideas since time immemorial. It is in the seeking and not in the discovery. The title of this presentation was billed as Freemasonry as a Hermetic Philosophy. My hope is not to convince you that Freemasonry is only this, but to show you a perspective that you may not have considered before. I think it best if we discuss Freemasonry first so that you have a clear idea of the context of this ideal. Freemasonry makes a definitive statement early on in its degrees. It says that it is a system of morality, veiled in allegory, and illustrated by symbols. Now, this is fairly concise, and yet we constantly forget it in our approach. How many times have we discussed whether Hiram Abiff was a real person? How many times have we debated whether the craft actually extends back to Solomon's temple? How many times do we debate the origin of the stonemason guilds? It is a system of morality by its own admission, and it is veiled in allegory. I believe that teaching allegory serves a very specific purpose. Man learns by experience. I can tell you all day long what the next slide will be. I can tell you all day long what an orange tastes like. But until you taste the orange for yourself, you cannot truly know what it is. Allegory tells you something but allows for the personal discovery of the real meaning, therefore allowing you to come to understand it as a truth. This is the only way its teachings can actually affect change in the individual. It takes time, effort, and understanding. In addition, Freemasonry is a true initiatic experience. By this, I mean that there are certain stages that have been present in all initiatory experiences from the ancient mystery schools all the way up to today. These stages are cleansing and preparation, education of the mind, and a symbolic death and rebirth. I'm sure you recognize these stages in Freemasonry. Where were you first prepared to be made a Mason? When you were divested of your outward appearance and caused to kneel and attend prayer, you were undergoing a cleansing and a preparation. As a fellow craft, you are then educated on the liberal arts and the sciences, and in fact, you are told that the greatest subject a Mason can study is the mind. We'll come back to that a little bit later. And of course, the stage of symbolic death and rebirth are familiar to us all. In this way, Freemasonry seeks to truly initiate its members. This means that it intends, in a very real way, to take a man and change him, raise him up into a new life, one where he embraces a new path and uses the new tools now at his disposal to form himself into something bigger and better. I think it's clear that those involved in crafting the third degree understood all of this and that it was their intention to revive this ancient practice. In all of this, we are carried through the journey with an allegory. You are taught from your entrance into the Masonic Lodge that you are working on the building of a temple. You are given detail after detail on the building of this temple, and in the end, you come to represent its chief architect. Names and dates and locations are all very convincing, and the story woven in such a way that it's easy to get lost in its intricate veil. But a veil it is. It tells us itself. It is, in fact, an allegory for the building of the temple of man. This allegory doesn't stop with the craft degrees, but continues into the appendant bodies as well. The building of the temple of man becomes clearer and further understood in the successive degrees which extend into the family of Freemasonry. In all of its teachings, though, we must endeavor to remain vigilantly aware that we are being taught not about King Solomon and his temple, but about ourselves and our temple. When we speak of the loss of the great architect, we speak of the archetype of beauty and creation. When we speak of the loss of the Word, and we know that in the beginning the Word was with God and that the Word was God, then we know that our loss was in fact our connection to the divine. And when we speak of the sanctum sanctorum, we speak of the heart of man. The message in the craft degrees is one of loss, yet it is not hopeless. You were raised into a new life. You're not told these things because of how it is. It is an allegory designed to teach you what can be. We are directed to search within the pages of the volume of the sacred law and faithfully guide our steps by the truth therein revealed, assuming the intention in part is to further the study of the story of Solomon and his temple. We learn some key points on what is possible in our new character as a Freemason. These teachings are specifically laid out in the appendant bodies of the craft as well. In particular, we learn what happens when the temple is completed and dedicated to God. We also learn in the Royal Arch that which was lost, but not until we begin to build the second temple, which, according to the allegory, can only mean the afterlife. But back to the contemplation of the temple. Upon completing the temple and dedicating it to God, he himself descends into the sanctum sanctorum and answers the questions of the high priest when asked. He rested between the cherubim on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. But let us not get lost in the allegory. If the temple is the temple of man, and the sanctum sanctorum is the heart of man, then when the temple is completed and dedicated, Freemasonry tells us that it is possible for God to dwell in the heart of man and answer questions when asked. It is a lesson of the possibility to reunite with the divine, yet while you live, and that your questions will be answered by him when asked. This is a lofty and worthy goal, one only the initiated can hope for. With this possibility in mind, Freemasonry sets its sights on teaching its initiates how to build that temple properly. It is a system of morality, after all. It teaches that through labor and the application of faith, hope, and charity, and the four cardinal virtues, that we can fashion ourselves into a fitting place wherein God himself may dwell. A lofty goal indeed. But Freemasonry teaches something more, because Freemasonry doesn't make us priests, and it doesn't make us prophets. It makes us masters. What does it mean to be a master mason? If the mason is building the temple of his life, and you are a master, then it follows that the implication is that you are indeed a master of your own life. This is the heart and soul of Freemasonry. You are now a master of your own destiny, or more importantly, you should be. It is through the understanding of yourself as a mechanism of the universe and utilizing the tools of the craft to build your future that you may reunite and unite your will with the divine, so that in harmony together you will become the master of your own world. This is the real work of a Freemason, the great work. It is written on the Tyler's chair in the house of the temple, just outside the room where the Supreme Council meets. Know thyself. Hermeticism is a more difficult subject to approach. It is challenging because of the broad nature of the term and its originating in a time when they were less concerned about recording facts and more about conveying the meaning and purpose of something. In its broadest aspects, it refers to a large collection of writings from ancient Egypt and earlier, all of which are attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes is a curious and important figure to the ancient mysteries. He was an Egyptian priest, and Hermes Trismegistus, or Thrice Greatus, was supposed to have lived about 2000 BC. He was a celebrated Egyptian legislator, priest, and philosopher who lived in the reign of Ninus. He is said to have written 36 books on theology and philosophy and 6 upon medicine, all of which have been lost to antiquity. There are many traditions of him, one of which, related by Eusebius, is that he introduced the hieroglyphics into Egypt. Clearly, this is a legendary or possibly even allegorical attribution. Its purpose, though, seems to be to position Hermes as the bringer of wisdom, and his title of Trismegistus translating into thrice great, indicating that he was wise in medicine, philosophy, and religion. He was an Egyptian philosopher, but he's also blended with the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. It was fabled that Pythagoras and Plato had derived their knowledge from him, and that he had recorded his inventions upon pillars. He is supposedly the author of the Emerald Tablet, which is the foundation of many Hermetic organizations and philosophies, and also the foundation of alchemy. The writings that do survive are found in a collection that is referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum. Notably of these is the Divine Pymander, and a more recent Hermetic work is the Kybalion. These all help to shape the ideas and principles which have fallen under the mantle of Hermeticism. Ultimately, due to its ancient origin, or perhaps it's just the nature of such things, Hermeticism would appear to be a theosophic study, predating Masonry and attributing its origins to the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. There are 7 principles of Hermeticism that stand out. They're stated in the Kybalion as the principle of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths, and all paradoxes can be reconciled. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the left is the measure of the swing to the right. Rhythm compensates. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to the law. Chance is but a name for a law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Each of these, a presentation could be written about. They're deep, philosophical concepts presented here only as bulleted points to give you a basic overview of Hermetic thought. But I want to expound on one of them, however, which will help us understand how Freemasonry fits into this ideal, or more appropriately, how Freemasonry expresses these ideals in its form of esoteric teaching. The principle of mentalism, and that the all is mind and the universe is mental, is an abstract concept that dives deep into our understanding of what is possible on this plane of existence. In conjunction with the principle of polarity, it teaches the notion of mental transmutation. Hermeticism teaches that the mind, as well as metals and elements, may be transmuted from state to state, degree to degree, condition to condition, pole to pole, or vibration to vibration. True Hermetic transmutation is a mental art. The notion here is that if the underlying structure of the universe is mental, then the art of mental transmutation is the very art of changing the universe around us. Our ability to apply our will in a structured, disciplined way, and it can, in effect, render us masters of our own world. Hermeticism is the foundation of another allegorical art mentioned before, that of alchemy. In medieval literature, it's become known as the art of changing lead into gold. By the uninitiated, it had been viewed as a vain art, based in greed, and using chemistry to change base lead into rich gold. But it is a hermetic art, and true hermetic transmutation is a mental art. Freemasons should view alchemy as an allegorical science then, and recognize the lead as the rough ashlar and the gold as the perfect ashlar. Instead of seeing a chemical science, you will see a spiritual alchemy of perfecting one's soul. Curiously, the symbol for gold in alchemical teachings is the point within the circle. I think that already we've seen some cursory parallels in Hermetic thought and Freemasonry, but I'd like to make a more direct connection for you. After all, similarity in practice does not always imply similarity in intent. I still hold that Freemasonry is indeed a Hermetic philosophy, and I want to share with you how in our own history and in our own ritual we point to it. And I also want to express to you why it's important for us to know it. To begin to show you a link to Hermeticism and Freemasonry, I want to start with one of the more understated rites of Freemasonry, the cryptic rite. This can also be found in the 13th Scottish Rite degree, the Royal Arch of Enoch, or Knight of the Ninth Arch. I will use the cryptic rite as the cryptic degrees for my example, only because I'm more familiar with them, not out of any kind of favor or prejudice. In the cryptic degrees, we witness the erection of a secret vault or crypt under 9 arches, where the secrets of Masonry are maintained. Every detail in this story is a retelling of the Masonic legend of Enoch, which is recounted in both Mackey's and Coyle's encyclopedias. How many of you have heard of the biblical character Enoch? Oh, fair amount, great. Well, Enoch is no small figure in biblical history, despite the fact that he barely appears in the Bible itself. Enoch was in fact the 7th of the patriarchs. He's the son of Jared, the grandfather of Noah. He was born in 662 BC, and it is said that his earthly pilgrimage terminated in 987, where he did not die, but is one of only 2 people that ascended directly to heaven. According to accounts, his life was exactly 365 years long. It is said that he was disgusted with the evil swelling in man all around him, and appalled at the thought of its inevitable consequences, he fled to the solitude and secrecy of Mount Moriah, and devoted himself to prayer and pious contemplation. It was on that spot, then first consecrated by this patriarchal hermitage, but afterwards made still more holy by the sacrifices of Abraham, David, and of Solomon, that we are informed that the Shekinah, or sacred presence, appeared to him and gave him those instructions which were to preserve the wisdom of the antediluvians to their posterity, when the world, with the exception of but one family, should be destroyed by the forthcoming flood. The circumstances which occurred at that time are recorded in a tradition which now forms what has been called the Great Masonic Legend of Enoch. And it is said that he walked with God, and it was transmitted to him all the wisdom of the liberal arts and sciences, and given to him was the ineffable name of God. Along with the arts and sciences, God informed Enoch that he would destroy the world by either flood or fire. In the legend, it is said that having realized that this wonderful knowledge that he had been given would be lost forever when the earth was destroyed, that he and his sons erected 2 pillars, one pillar of marble to withstand the influence of fire, and the other of brass to resist the action of water. On the pillar of brass, he engraved the history of creation, the principles of the arts and sciences, and the doctrines of speculative Freemasonry as they were practiced in his time. And on the one of marble, he inscribed characters and hieroglyphics, importing that near the spot where they stood, a precious treasure was deposited in a subterranean vault. It is said that Enoch, under the inspiration of the Most High and in obedience to the instructions that he had received in a vision, built a temple underground on Mount Moriah and dedicated it to God. His son Methuselah constructed the building, although he was not acquainted with his father's motives for the erection. This temple consisted of 9 vaults, situated perpendicularly beneath each other and communicated by apertures left in each vault. Enoch then caused a triangular plate of gold to be made, each side of which was a cubit long, and he enriched it with the most precious stones and encrusted the plate on a stone of agate of the same form. On the plate he engraved the true name of God, or the tetragrammaton, and placing it on a cubical stone, known thereafter as the stone of foundation, he deposited the whole within the lowest arch. When this subterranean building was completed, he made a door of stone, and attaching to it a ring of iron by which it might be occasionally raised, he placed it over the opening of the uppermost arch, and so covered it that the aperture could not be discovered. The location of this hidden vault, Mount Moriah, is the same place where Abraham went to sacrifice his child for God, where Solomon built his glorious temple, and where the second temple stood, where Muhammad supposedly ascended directly to heaven, and the Dome of the Rock stands today. It is said that this is the single most important piece of real estate for all the major Western religions. And the legend says that this underground chamber was later discovered by Solomon when he excavated for the foundation of his great temple. Thus is related the Masonic legend of Enoch. Anyone familiar with the cryptic degrees will immediately recognize the common elements. There is no doubt that the inspiration for the drama that unfolds within the cryptic degrees is indeed this very legend. This may not seem to be important when looking at organized Freemasonry today. The connection lies buried in our past, before the formation of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 and Anderson's constitutions in 1725. Anderson's constitutions were commissioned to be the definitive work designed to thenceforth govern the craft. Prior to that point, the craft was governed by documents which we now call the ancient constitutions or charges. Within the ancient charges, this statement is essentially unchanged in all of them. The great Hermarines, that was Cubus' son, that was Sem's son, that was Noah's son. This same Hermarines was afterwards called Hermes, the father of wisdom. He found one of the two pillars of stone and found the science written therein, and he taught it to other men. Hermes, the father of wisdom, who is indeed a man called Hermes Trismegistus, is cited as the founder of Freemasonry in the ancient charges. What's more is that here we have Hermes Trismegistus, the great-grandson of Noah, who is the great-grandson of Enoch, discovering the pillars of the porch. Enoch designs two pillars intended to survive fire and flood, conflagration or inundation, as our ritual says. His grandson Noah is the only surviving family of the great flood, and Noah's great-grandson Hermes discovers the pillars and returns the knowledge to man, a chosen family bloodline preserving the word for future generations. It is in this way that the cryptic degrees tie themselves to the craft degrees more strongly than any other system, not on the surface with our current system, but to our heritage prior to 1717. Hermes' title of Trismegistus, as we said, means thrice great. In the cryptic degrees, Solomon is sometimes referred to as the thrice illustrious King Solomon. When you serve as illustrious master of a council of cryptic masons, you are eligible for the degree of thrice illustrious master. Even Anderson's constitutions did not fully abandon the concept, and in his constitutions he briefly states the legend of Enoch, and when he published the second edition of his constitutions, he repeated the legend with the additional statement that Enoch was expert and bright in both the science and art of geometry and masonry, an abridgment of which he placed on pillars which he had erected. Now, the ancient constitutions were compiled and rewritten by Dr. Anderson in 1723, and this is the first time that Hiram Abiff is mentioned by name in Masonic history. The mention of Hermes disappears. But interestingly enough, one of Hermes' prominent creations mentioned earlier, known as the Emerald Tablet, the basis of Hermetic philosophies and foundation of the science of alchemy, begins by saying, "I am called Hiram, one in essence, three in aspect, and in this Trinity is the wisdom of the whole world." Now, perhaps Dr. Anderson was familiar with this when he rendered his edition of the Masonic Constitutions. Undoubtedly, his close confidant, the Reverend Dr. John Theophilus de Sagaliers, who became the third Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England, certainly was, as he was a philosopher and a practicing alchemist. It has been cited that although attributed to Dr. James Anderson, the general regulations found in the first edition of the Constitutions were compiled under his supervision. And so here we are. Freemasonry has proven itself to be a multifaceted entity indeed. I'm always encouraged and buoyed up by the noble aspects of its charity and its brotherhood. I'm often enamored with its royal character and its rich history. My spirit is lifted up by its lofty spiritual concepts. Often I find myself alone on this journey, and yet I find strength in its teachings which embolden me to not fear standing alone. But these things do not reveal to me what Freemasonry is, not its core, which has a penchant for remaining elusive. It is when you begin to see Freemasonry as a philosophy that you begin to understand that its elusiveness is its greatest character. Freemasonry wants seekers. Those who stop seeking become a stone that has ceased to be wrought. It is Freemasonry's philosophic nature that bestows its riches upon its masters. The hermetic nature of this craft offers something more. It offers a system of understanding that may render unto its builders the true secret of building. It is in the hermetic nature of this philosophy that we may become true masters. The parallels of the Hermetic arts as well as the other Hermetic societies to Freemasonry are intentional and strong, I believe. It proposes that we ourselves indeed swing the hammer that shapes the stone and builds the temple. It sets squarely in our hands the ability to shape our temple and our world and our future. While Freemasonry is not Hermeticism, it is its own system of Hermetic philosophy, and with its own allegorical teachings, it's arguably the most successful and widespread of them all. Plainly stated, Freemasonry, as a Hermetic philosophy, says that we have the power to shape and form our world and our lives by the direct application of our minds, performing a mental transmutation of the physical world around us. If effective, no teaching could be more powerful, no initiation more life-changing. I stated in the beginning that Freemasonry is exactly what its members make it. This I believe to be true, and that is why I find it so important for these opportunities to engage one another. Not all Masonic truths are buried in dusty pages of authors of the past. Many will be born today in the minds of our contemporaries. I doubt that those great men of the Royal Society spent too much time dwelling on the revelations of old. They were interpreting things according to their current time and offering revelations that came from deep contemplation that they themselves had made. What did these teachings mean to them then, at that moment? In turn, we should be looking at these teachings along with their revelations and come to our own as they relate to us today. That is the nature of philosophy. I feel like today we suffer from a lack of self-confidence. In a way, the term Masonic education has failed us and led to Masonic education being hijacked by educators and academics. Their aim is to document history and record data, and as a result, we begin to be told what Masonic truth is. We are inundated with school course after school course, each with their appropriate patent of completion, and all we end up with is the ability to cite book and verse of a thought that was relevant a century ago, but today can seem trite and obvious at best, and at its worst, mundane. If Freemasonry is what we make it, then let us realize that it is a philosophy at heart and commence to engage each other's intellect. Let us look around us and through the lens of Masonic philosophy begin to see the world in a new context, and together, one against another, develop new revelations. Let us make Freemasonry what it is meant to be, a catalyst, a vehicle that drives the heart of man to new heights and makes us not librarians, but visionaries. If the Hermetic principles are indeed active, then what we think defines what we become. And if we continue to think only of what dead men have said, we have already died along with them. If we excite our minds with new meanings and new visions, deeper aspirations spurred on by the timeless allegorical lessons of this royal art, then we will rise again and like a magnet draw near to us like minds who will sharpen us as we sharpen them. Thank you.
Good job, John.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for that very enlightening speech, John. So why don't we take a break until 2:15? We'll get the stage set up, and then we'll be able to ask John some questions. We'll see you at 2:15.
Awesome.
That was fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Of course, as a philosopher, I'm a little bit biased.
Right. Well, it's hard.
It's not
to,
often you hear people speak well of philosophy. So
It's hard to tell how people will take that, and I know that it's not really a traditional academic approach to giving a presentation, but that's how I feel.
Yeah,
So,
I think this is exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for as a committee, and certainly I think the others are looking for.
awesome. Great. Well, let's see what I have to say, right?
Okay. Well, I'm honored that we're going to be able to publish that in the.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can send it electronically too if you.
Okay,
you
that
need,
would be
so,
good. Yeah, so electronic would be helpful. So I think that I'm going to be the new editor of this. So Canning has been the editor, but in this feeling, I think he's going to be able to follow through with that.
Time-wise, how did we do? It looks like we're okay.
Oh, you did great.
Right?
You did great.
Good. All right, I gotta find a drink of water.
Okay.
Thank you for all your help on the computer. Sure. Appreciate it.
all my comments as you.
No, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it.
I'm going through the Mason Craftsman program on the Southern jurisdiction. And what I like about the way they're progressing it is that it's getting to be less and less final answer, and it's more tell us what this means.
Right. Yeah, that's important. That's what it is. Make you think, right? That's the point. Yeah.
Apply it.
Yeah.
Why am I here?
Well, thank you, brethren. Brother Bridegroom has given us a lot to chew on here, and so this is your chance to pick his brain. So we have our 2 microphones ready to go. So again, same rules apply. Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Tell us your name and your lodge number, and direct your questions to Dr. Bridegroom's comments. I keep calling you Doctor, Brother Bridegroom.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, who wants to start? Back there.
Ryan Steele, University Lodge 51 here, Philadelphia. Top 3 books to get started on Hermetic reading. You got any recommendations?
So on Hermeticism itself, I would recommend the Divine Pymander and the Kabbalion. And there's a couple of different versions of it, and they get to be kind of expensive, but there's a book by Arthur Waite called The Hermetic Library. Thank you. So those are great books for Hermeticism itself. If you're looking for some connections to Freemasonry and Hermeticism, there's a book called Hermetic Freemasonry, and that one has it's a real small book, and the connections are fairly simple, but it'll get you thinking about how the two relate to one another, because the Hermetic books can be fairly abstract. So.
Anybody else? Down in front here?
Thank you. Josh Palmer, Lodge 43, Lancaster. Did you mention in there, Brother Bridegroom, that they found one, this to Hermes Trismegistus, he found one pillar? Or
That's how the legend relates it, yeah. And I'm assuming it's the liberal arts and sciences pillar that they're referring to.
Is there any information you have on the other pillar? Like, because I've heard other traditions with Nimrod, Tower of Babel, that kind of stuff. Does that factor into these legends
interestingly enough, so because these are obviously legendary accounts, and they vary slightly depending on what source you read them out of, the one that I specifically cited in the paper said that one had the history of creation, liberal arts and sciences. The other pillar showed the location of the secret vault. And so according to that, the pillar with the location of the secret vault was not found, and the only way that we knew that was that when they went to build the temple, they discovered it when they were digging for the foundation. So I'm not familiar really of a tradition that speaks specifically of which pillar was found, but of course also in the notion that those pillars were also the pillars of the porch. Our descriptions in the ritual of the pillars of the porch, that the history of the liberal arts and sciences and Freemasonry were deposited therein, and so it all kind of roundabout relates to each other, but none of them are very specific. So, which again I would say, don't get caught up in the allegory, right? So you get caught up in the details and say, oh well, what did the pillar actually say on it? But that's not really the point. The idea is how the knowledge was preserved, who preserved it, why. It becomes a very philosophical thought process as opposed to getting lost in the story itself.
Down in front here?
Hi, Brother Matt Wrigley, Warren Lodge 310. Thank you, Brother Bridegroom. I find anything about Hermeticism fascinating, and alchemy in general.
Yay.
Hey, seriously. So the first thing before I ask my question, I just want to say I really love the point where you talk about what you think you become. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Napoleon Hill and his concept of thoughts being things, and I just think it really is a groundbreaking thought that you can create your world based on what you project in your mind and then take action to sort of realize and create. I have two questions, really. One is easy. What's your favorite Hermetic philosophy? So, as above, so below, mentalism, any of those. And then the second question is, what's your opinion philosophically on the universal medicine in regards to alchemy? I'm sure you have more of a non-literal opinion on it, if I'm not being too, or asking too much.
So, okay, all right.
Sorry, I know that was a lot.
No, that's okay. I think the 7 Hermetic principles that I laid out, if I was to pick one, it would probably be the first one, which would be the all is the mind and the universe is mental, and because that really sets the tapestry for how everything else functions in Hermetic thought. And I actually had a little bit of a difficult time pulling out how I was going to explain what I wanted to say just using one principle or 2 principles, because they all interact together. So sort of that's why it becomes such an abstract topic to talk about, because they all weave into each other in a way that forms a bigger thought or a bigger idea of sort of how the universe actually operates. For example, the notion that everything, there was the principle that said that like and unlike are the same, they're just different in degree. You can understand that if you think about there's no such thing as hot and there's no such thing as cold. They're degrees on the scale of temperature, right? And so love and hate, the same type of thing. Love and hate are the same emotion, they're just polarized so you can transmute one into the other through a mental application. Of course, that plays directly into how do you do that? Well, it's through the principle of vibration, and because everything moves and everything vibrates and the universe is mind, and now you start to work on mental. So we're getting a little deep into Hermetic thought, which it tends to. I like to explain how I believe that Freemasonry is a Hermetic philosophy, but true Hermetic thought tends to go off the reservation for a lot of people. So I try to be, the notion of that the all is the mind and the universe is mental, and that you as an individual have the power to actually physically change the universe around you, sounds a little hokey pokey. I forget how Mike said it. He said something like that.
I think it was booga booga.
Booga booga, right? Even though certainly quantum science is starting to discover some similar things about how we observe the world around us and how that affects the world around us. So, and what was the second part of your question? Forgive me. So that's what you're referring to as a philosopher's stone. So, humans are interesting creatures. We could easily just say, be better, right? You should be a better person. Oh, great. Yeah, well, we all know that, right? But for some reason, we tend to concoct very elaborate myths and theories to help convince us of how and why we should do such things. Probably largely because we are also sensual creatures that are subject to wants and desires of the material world. So, which Freemasonry also deals with, in their philosophy of divesting yourself of the vices and superfluities. So, the notion that there is a philosopher's stone that you can make, which I don't think, I mean, there are some folks, I know some folks that claim to be practicing alchemists and claim that they can do that in a laboratory. If they still look like they're 20 years old when I'm 90, we'll have something to talk about. But I think that the idea is this notion that if you work on the mental transmutation, which is sort of the allegorical story, the lead into the gold, the rough ashlar into the perfect ashlar, if you work on that, then you will realize that the key to what we all as Freemasons might call the immortality of the soul, the belief of the immortality of the soul, if you work on these things with this process, then you will recognize that the philosopher's stone, that which gives you immortality, is an understanding of the true nature of who you are and what you are, not something that's going to allow you to live until 20, 90, or something like that. And who would want to do that anyways, right? I mean, this place is full of misery and greed and hate. So yeah, to me, it's a very philosophical thought process that is real in the essence that we are something more than what we are here. And so is that transmutation attainable in a very real sense? I believe it is. And that, so I like to give, I might be rambling, but forgive me for a minute. I'm going to tell you a story, right? So let's say that I took you on a plane to Japan, and I dropped you off at the train station, and I said, you got to be at Central Gardens in 2 hours. But you don't speak Japanese, and you can't read the signs, and you're stuck in the subway station. You have no idea how to get where you're going, right? You're going to stand there, you're going to flounder, whatever. If you spent 3 months or a year prior to me dropping you off in Japan, studying their subway system, learning how the language works, assuming you could learn Japanese in 3 months, forgive me. When I dropped you off there, you would go, oh, okay, I'm going to take the green line, I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this, right? This is the science of the afterlife, right? When we're talking about working on things of a spiritual nature and working while we live on these sort of hermetic concepts, these spiritual ideas, what we're doing is planning for when we get dropped into the chaos of whatever comes next, perhaps we will recognize signs, symbols that will help us get where we need to go or understand at least where we are, right? So that's how I kind of look at this philosophy and how it directly applies and relates to us. We all know we're going to the same place. We have no idea what it's going to be when we get there, but we have these sort of ideas of these eternal ideas that we can study and fashion that will hopefully help us when we land in the second temple of the Royal Arch, if you were, if that helps.
Hi, Eric Krogstad, St. John's 115. Just curious what your thoughts were on how the Hermetic line came to America. Was it through Freemasonry or did it come prior?
I'm trying to remember dates, which I'm not very adept at. I think that so Hermeticism has kind of always been there from Egyptian times, right? So historically, it probably could have found its way into culture from an academic standpoint, just by studying historically, the texts and things that came out of that time. The notion of practicing Hermeticism could have come over here through Freemasonry, or at least, see, Freemasonry to me, it's a Hermetic philosophy, but like I said in the paper, I wanted to make sure I wasn't trying to tell you guys that Freemasonry is Hermeticism, because it's not. It's just, Freemasonry is an amalgam of all of these different mystery schools and sciences, and it has a strong element of Hermeticism in it, in my opinion. But there are other Hermetic societies that have come over here and operated as well. I mean, the Rosicrucian Society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a lot of those, some of them were brought over here by Freemasons, some of them were brought over here by people who were around Freemasonry but not necessarily Freemasons themselves. So I don't know that I could pinpoint whether Freemasonry was responsible for it coming over here, but I certainly believe that when it came over here, it carried a strong element of that with it.
Got a question back there?
Jim Brand, Concordia 67 from Jenkintown. Have you by any chance studied Freemasonry in Japan and so on, and Taoism and the Jade Emperor's Mind Seal Classic? Do you happen to be familiar with any of that?
Forgive me, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Taoism in Japan and Freemasonry in Japan. A lot of these topics are covered under Taoism and the Jade Emperor's Mind Seal Classic. Have you any experience with that at all?
I'm not super versed in those traditions. The Eastern traditions I belong to an organization that actually explores some of the Eastern traditions as relates to Freemasonry. There are a lot of parallels in that thought as well. So this is an interesting question, because we all know Freemasonry as being non-religious, non-denominational. What secular is probably, I'm not familiar with the term, forgive me, but ecumenical, thank you. But that wasn't always the case, and actually Freemasonry prior to Anderson's constitutions largely a Christian organization. So it poses a really interesting question: is how could a Christian organization embody Eastern philosophy characteristics, hermeticism, and those sorts of things? I have my own thoughts on that. I probably won't delve into them here. But more importantly, what it displays, in my opinion, is that Freemasonry has a very unique characteristic of preserving things even when the people who are communicating it are unaware of it. Right? So the ritual of Freemasonry has this unique ability of preserving a knowledge or a philosophy, even though those who are conferring the degree are completely unaware of what's there. And so in that way, I could see it picking up things along the way and carrying these principles and these philosophies through without the Christians of the time being aware that they were communicating it, or even now the Christian principles of the order, which are also strong in Freemasonry, that the members now would say, oh, it's got nothing to do with that. Well, it certainly does in a lot of ways, and if you can choose not to see it, but it's there, you know. So yeah, there is a strong connection with some Eastern philosophies, and all of them, you know, the Eastern philosophies are actually much closer to Hermeticism than, say, Western religion philosophies are. But I think that there are parallels in Christianity to Hermeticism as well that are valuable. But
Over here, in the back.
Fred Whitley, Ephrata Lodge 665 in Ephrata. I'm very interested personally in being somewhat like a lawyer, who would argue a case and usually get ammunition from both sides so you can help. I have a son that belongs to a very fundamentalist church. And if you were to go into that church's office and say, do you have a brochure of how your church feels about Freemasonry, they go to the wall and pull it off and they hand it to you, and it's got all these negative things. And as you're talking, I keep saying to myself, what is it that these people feel about us that maybe they're picking up about the topics that we're talking about that I don't feel comfortable with, that I don't know, that type of thing. I'd like you to maybe give a thought as to where you think some of these people would be coming about, where we're anti whatever you want to put in there. And hear what you have to say about that, please, if I made my question clear.
yeah, I think I understand. I think I understand that you put me in a very dangerous position. What I would say publicly most of the time to that would be that it's their problem, not ours, and so I have no idea really what's going on in their heads or why they would object to certain things. I would say that from an organized religion standpoint, they have a very vested interest in sort of controlling the notion of salvation, right? We have the story. This is so. And what I'm saying shouldn't be really that aggravating to anybody, because it's also the responsible for all of the divisions within Christianity. You know, the differences of how the Islamic religions, the Jewish religions, and the Christian religions all pray to the same God. They all pray to the God of Abraham, but they all differ widely on how we get there. And so even within the denominations of Christianity, whether it's the notions on how baptism is conferred or what the sacraments are, and each one says our sacraments are our sacraments, and if you receive the sacraments over there, they're not valid over here, and we may or may not allow you to retake the sacraments when you come over here. And so they have a very vested interest in sort of being definitive and being the authority on what is the course of salvation. And so the notion of an organization that allows you to have a direct personal connection with the divine, without the need of a teacher or a preacher, I could see them objecting to that strenuously. They will cite a lot of times that it's the fact that we take obligations or vows. Most of them is, particularly I think Catholicism, what they cite as their problem is that we take an obligation or a vow, and you're not allowed to do that unless you are taking those obligations and vows of the church. But I think it runs deeper than that. I think it runs deeper into the notion of what salvation is, how do we communicate with God, what rights do we have as an individual human being to connect directly with the divine. And the Eastern religions, and certainly the notion of hermeticism in a roundabout way, says that you can do that on your own. You know, you can do that personally. Now, I'm a Christian. I attend church, and I enjoy it, and I see a real value in that experience. But I also believe that, you know, my connection with God can be very direct, and I don't need a mediator. So, does that help you a little bit without me going down a road that's going to get me expunged?
Just to follow up, what would you say as a Freemason you would like to see us as a group become more familiar with Freemasonry that maybe is a topic that we're not comfortable with or even knowledgeable of? I want to be able to talk to these people from a more specific viewpoint, but I don't feel like I have my ammunition yet. Thank you.
So on the surface, I've always been a little bit baffled. You know, we open every meeting with the Holy Bible on the altar. Almost all of our teachings revolve around biblical circumstances. In fact, I probably learned more about the Bible in my tenure as a Freemason than all of the time before I was a Freemason, going to church and being a kid and Sunday school and all that. So Freemasonry, in a very real way, brought me back to religion, because it brought me back to understanding that there was an importance to a spirituality in my life, okay? And so I always challenge, if there's someone who is of a particular religious persuasion that has a problem with Freemasonry, I always challenge them to take a look at what we actually do. Not what you read on the internet, you know, and you always get the crazies that'll say, oh, well, you're just not one of the 33rds. You don't really know the real cabal that's going on. And my argument to that always is, in Indiana alone, there's 60,000 Freemasons, 55, 60,000, okay, in Indiana alone. So there's millions in the United States. And if there's like 150 of them that are sacrificing babies and riding goats at night, but all of the rest of them are supporting children's hospitals and doing charitable works and visiting their church, that is a failed, evil organization. You know? It's really not well thought out. And so, you know, to me, it's really kind of preposterous. And I do my best to hearken back to the entered apprentice charge that says, you know, don't enter into argument with those who, through ignorance, may ridicule our organization. There's wisdom in that, and sometimes you just have to walk away. But the best thing to do is to be active. If you have a church and you want to be active in it, show them what kind of person you are, and then when they start thinking about Freemasonry, they'll think of you and say, how bad could it be, you know? I mean, my grandfather's a Freemason, and when I start thinking of what, you know, you guys, what is Jack Chick, those little cartoons you used to get, the pamphlets stuck on your windows that, you know, said that we were responsible for all the evils in the world, and I'd look at that cartoon and I'd look at my grandpa and go, yeah, I don't think so, you know. So
another thing that I think is interesting in this regard is that John has just given us this hermetic interpretation of Freemasonry, which is, as he presents it, at least the first principle is idealistic, that all there is mind and its contents. But the major objection that the Catholic Church levied against Freemasonry is that it was materialistic and rationalistic. It thought that all there was matter in motion, and the only source of knowledge was reason, and of course the Church disagreed with that. So I think that just shows that there's many different interpretations of Freemasonry. You can't pin it to just one, and to identify one particular interpretation and say, well, this is what Freemasonry is, and we're against it, is just wrong.
I agree.
Down here in front?
I will mention, too, that, you know, that there might be some twinge of the fact that most of our ritual, our allegory, revolves around the Jewish part of the Bible and and Jewish mysticism. And so, there could be, from a Christian standpoint, that most of what we do deals with Old Testament. That could be a little bit of an issue too, but I don't think that it should be, but it probably does stick in some craws somewhere. I don't know.
Hi, Benjamin Lippman, Shiloh McCall Lodge, number 558 in Sourton, Pennsylvania. You're talking in your presentation about rhythm and vibrations, and this musical theory, the music of spheres, where everything in the universe has a frequency and vibrates, and even the atoms that make up us, the earth, the moon, the sun, everything has this frequency that creates a symphony for God. Is that part of the Hermetic philosophy, or some semblance of that idea? Is there some Masonic correlation with that that's deeper in this aspect, or?
So, yes, I think one of the Hermetic principles is principle of vibration, and it says exactly that. And so, this is an interesting thing, right? So we've got a Hermetic principle, which is predating the Egyptian dynasties, that's saying everything is vibration, everything moves, everything fluctuates, everything has a frequency. Long before there was a science that could really dive down and actually discover that. To me, that's fascinating. That there are things that were thought about in the minds of our ancient brethren that they really probably had no way to actually measure or understand. So this is where Hermeticism starts to go into some really kind of uncharted, thought-provoking territories of, through mental transmutation, what is actually possible. What is actually happening when we think of an idea and send those vibrations out into the universe, and then things echo back to us and come to us, and certainly on a very cursory level, we all understand that our attitudes and our demeanors certainly change that which comes to us, and the things that we get the opportunities to do and the people that we are around. But to actually go into some sort of a philosophical thought of that you can, in a very real way, sit down and in a dedicated effort use your personal will to change your life and your world around you, that's a deep well. It's a fascinating one to me. I think if I would encourage you all to go do it, it might change your life. But it is even going as deep as the notion of, if you could change the future and you could change the past, would you know it? The moment that they changed, would your past just then be a changed past? Would you know that it changed, or would the old past disappear and the new past replace it? So that the concept that time in itself is not linear and it doesn't exist, and that we are basically in this pool of potential, this all is the mind of potentiality, and we are sort of creating and unfolding it as we go. And what does that mean for the interactions of you to me and our personal ideas and wills? And so it's a very deep road to go down, but it's fascinating. Now, does Freemasonry directly deal with that? I think that it does, but in a very, very roundabout way, and its Hermetic nature hints at it. But ultimately, Freemasonry is a science of the mind and teaching you how to be a master of your own temple. And so the notion that through these principles and these ideas, which actually are almost like the way that in Sunday school you can be taught some of the principles of Christianity, but you're taught them in a way that's very palatable for a child. You're taught these deep principles, but they're taught in a very simple story, okay? The notions of Freemasonry do kind of the same thing by telling you that these notions of charity and the four cardinal virtues, and if you can embody these in your life, that your life will change. Well, what does that really mean? I mean, that's the principle of mentalism. They're telling you that if you change the way you think, that change the way you act, and you move in a virtuous way, that the universe will change around you and line up, and doors will open and things will happen. And I think most of us who probably have dedicated ourselves to Freemasonry at one point or another and dove into these principles and tried to change our lives, we've seen it make a difference. It's why we come back. It's why we're here. You know, the guys who come back to Lodge and are at Lodge regularly are there because they say, it changed my life. Well, how did it change your life? You changed your life by adhering to these principles, which are actually very abstract ideas that deal directly with how you think and act. You know? So, I hope that somehow answers what you asked.
Any more questions? Well, I see that we've just about reached our limit here. That's we have one more, Josh.
Yeah.
Okay. So wait for the microphone, Josh. There you go.
I'm hearing the conversation, the questions, and your answers, and just to piggyback off of what Brother Whitley was saying about how some extremist religious sects may have these pamphlets about us. Do you see this mentalism, our ability to change our circumstances by virtuous moral living, as why some might say, you know, you're a witch or something like that, you're a magician, you know, like, but, you know, the principle, I think he was talking about the vibration with the, I forget which one of those 7 was, you know, it relates back within the philosophy there, you know, as above, so below. What do they say in the Lord's Prayer? Is in heaven, you know?
Right.
Do you think that's part of it? Like that there's some people might say Star Wars or whatever, people using the Force or whatever, learning to use these things. That's a funky New Age thing that's we as true, I put that in funny years, the true practitioners of faith will just let the world manifest as it will, so to speak. Does that get us into trouble? Is I guess my question.
Yes. So, okay, it's a good question, and I think I understand what you're saying. So, 2 things about that. First of all, you're right. And the Hermetic principle of causation says that nothing escapes the law. Everything has a cause and everything has an effect. Chance or magic or hocus pocus or whatever we want to call it is just a term that means that we don't recognize the law that is happening, okay? Now, as above, so below. There's a couple ways to discuss that statement, but in particular, the notion that man was made in God's image, which is, you know, obviously perpetuated by the religious establishments as well. God created the universe. Man was created in God's image. So man has the same creative ability that God has, right? Is kind of the notion there. So as above, so below. We have that same power in our own lives to manifest the universe around us. That principle is active all the time. And so those who are subject to their passions, who are... so I have another talk that I give that I'm just going to dovetail into for a second. And that's the notion that the mechanism of the universe is replication, okay? The universe takes things that we give it and it repeats it. You can find it scientifically all over the place. Plants beget plants. You know, even people beget little people. Everything replicates itself. And what you throw into the universe indiscriminately will replicate it. And so if you are not subduing your passions and removing the vices and superfluities from your life, and you are an angry person, the universe will replicate angry all around you. So the notion of the universe is mental and all of these different principles that are in effect is that your creative power is on all the time. And if you are unaware of it, then it's just sort of willy-nilly doing whatever your whim is at any given time. And so the one who is the master, the one who is given the keys to build his temple according to his plan, now controls this mental ability of creation and can become a master of his world and create the world around him. Everybody else is like a laser that's on all the time, just shooting, you know what I mean? And so, you know, this is why being initiated matters. This is why going through this process and being a part of Freemasonry matters to us, or whatever tradition that you are involved in, you know, be it a Hermetic tradition or a religious tradition. The notion is that you are getting control of yourself and you're purposely directing your life in a way that matters, you know. So, yeah, I think that it is dangerous. I mean, look around the world. It's obviously dangerous when people don't care, you know. But
Well, I think on that note we'll have to end, but again, thank you for a wonderful question and answer session, and thank you, John.
Thank you. Yep.
And for our closing, as always, we turn to John Postlewaite.
I see we've lost part of our audience, and that's probably just as well, because what I have to say probably won't be nearly as important or interesting as the information you receive from your two speakers today. But I would presume that most of the brothers who left early were from the western part of the state. How many people are left from the west? Raise your hand. Okay. Doesn't take much ability to count you. But that's fine, because most of us in the West know that we already know everything. And so I'm here to talk to the Philadelphia people, I guess. I'd like to tell you about a little story that is oriented in Western Pennsylvania, and some of the Eastern Pennsylvanians, that's the other state of Pennsylvania, might not recognize all the details, but I'll go slow and we'll try to make it. We had a brother who was a farmer, as many people in Western Pennsylvania are, and he was out in his field one morning working on his tractor, stares down at the end of the lane, and this car comes driving down the road and stops at the end of the road and then slowly proceeds up his lane. And the farmer notices, okay, that's a pretty late model car, but look at the small hubcaps, no accessories showing on this. And being the astute individual he was, along with 98% of the rest of the public, who realized, hey, that's a government car. So finally, the car came to the end of the lane where the house and the barn were. The farmer got off his tractor and walked over and put out his hand to introduce himself. He noticed the other newcomer wasn't so grateful. He sort of held back with his hand. And he said, well, what can I do for you? He said, well, I have to tell you that I'm from the DEA, and we got a report that there's some drug activity taking place here on your farm, and I'm here to gather evidence so we can prosecute you. And the farmer indicates, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no drug activity taking part here or being performed here. He said, but that's fine. You can search wherever you want. He said, you can search my house, you can search my barn, you can search the equipment shed, you can search the fields. He said, but by the way, don't go in that field. Well, our DEA agent was from Philadelphia, so he was smart enough to realize that's where I want to go. So he went in, searched the house, came back out empty-handed, searched the barn, still empty-handed, searched the equipment building, nothing there, starts walking down through the fields. The farmer gets on his tractor and starts working again. So after he searched everything except that field that the farmer told him not to go into, he decides, well, here's where I'm going to spend my time. Here's where I'm going to find the marijuana plants or evidence of cooking meth, whatever. And so he goes over, notice it's surrounded by a pretty substantial fence, all the better to keep those intruders out. Big heavy gate, he opens the gate, walks in, closes the gate behind him, and starts walking down through the field. Before very long, the farmer heard the most terrifying scream you could ever imagine. He looks over into the field, and he sees the DEA agent running, screaming, "Help me." He thinks, this is the same guy who told me, and in fact he showed me his badge, that he could go anywhere he wanted to because he had the papers and he had the badge. Now what's he screaming about over there? And about 35 feet behind him was this Jersey bull. Foam coming out of his nostrils, head down, ready to gore him. And with each running step the agent took, the bull seemed to gain another step. The guy's still screaming, "Help me, help me." Finally he screams at the farmer, "What should I do?" And the farmer shouts back, "Show him your badge." Now, unfortunately, many of us as Masons are also guilty of showing the public our badge. If we were to go out in the parking lot right now and start looking at cars, we'd find, and there's nothing wrong with this, we'd find a lot of bumper stickers. We'd find Blue Lodge, Scottish Rite, York Rite, Eastern Star. Great at covering up rust, incidentally, because you can get probably 20 of them on the back of a bumper. Or we'd see window stickers. We look around, some of us are wearing Masonic rings. Some of us have lapel pins on. And we do a great job of advertising Masonry. But that's all a non-Mason seems to know about us. So what we need to do, and it's been mentioned today, we need to be more than people who flash our badge of Masonry. The good that we do far outweighs all the bumper stickers we can ever buy and put on our cars. And it reminds me of some of the things that have happened, like even in my local area. 2 years ago, we had a 10-year-old boy. His family had absolutely no connection to Freemasonry. In a rather tragic accident, he got his arm or sleeve of his coat caught in a power takeoff shaft on the tractor. It ripped his arm off. That night, there was a stated meeting of a lodge in his area. And the incident was brought up, and somebody said, well, hey, we've got this almoners fund. That's one way to get rid of the money. And he said, no, can't spend the almoners fund for that. He's not connected to our lodge. Well, how about from our charity fund? Fine, but it's going to take some time. So somebody else said, well, let's just pass the hat because I know the family, they really don't have any money. The mother and father both work, they're good people, but every bit they earn, they use to maintain their house and to take care of their kids. So it's a small lodge. If they have 25 men attending, it's a good meeting. They end up with several $100s that night, which immediately was taken to the family and said, here, use it for your immediate expenses. We're going to get more for you. I'm sure that family thinks more of Masonry now than they did before. From that same lodge, when we had the first hurricane and flooding in Texas, one of their younger members sent out an email to the members of the lodge, got the list from the secretary, and he was in a position where his family owned a business, a road supply business. They had big trucks, they had trailers. He said, I'm going to take a trailer full of water and food to Texas. Anyone want to help fill it? Well, he ended up taking a rather large box tractor or box trailer or box truck and a trailer down. And I said, do you have any idea what to do once you got there? He said, no, but they were very glad to get it. They told me what to do and where to take it. And, you know, he was inexperienced enough to think, hey, you know, here's a great project and I can do it. He never looked at all the negatives, and he did it. And I'm sure the people were very glad for it. That's being a Mason rather than just showing your badge. That's what all of us need to do, to be good men in our homes, in our communities, and do good deeds, not only helping fellow Masons, but helping mankind. And we sit here today thinking, well, you know, there are a lot of things I'd like to do, but I'm just one very insignificant person. What could I possibly do to change the situation in my community? And as you're thinking how insignificant you are, few numbers you need to remember. There's 7 colors in the rainbow. Only 7. And look what Michelangelo did with those 7 colors. In music, how many notes? 7. And we had a few guys like Bach and Beethoven who were able to do a tremendous amount with just 7 notes. Numbers, very early in our education, and I think you referred to it, we learned, and it was pretty confusing, 10 numbers. All this other stuff is done with these 10 numbers. And look what Bernie Madoff's been able to do with those 10 numbers. So, I mean, you can do a lot if you put yourself into the project. Use your talents, and you'll find that you're able to accomplish marvelous goals. All right. Before we leave, I'd like to close the meeting with a prayer. Most holy and glorious Lord God, thou great architect of heaven and earth, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this academy. It gave us the opportunity to gain wisdom and knowledge, and we pray that you will enable us to take some of this wisdom and knowledge back home and apply it to our daily lives, to the lives of fellow Masons, and we appreciate this opportunity. We appreciate the opportunity to renew old friendships, to make new friendships, and just to be able to surround ourselves with good men. We ask that you aid us in this time of upheaval, wars and terrorism, drought or flood, hurricanes, tornadoes, fire, disease, social problems. We ask that you give us the ability to cope and effectively deal with these situations by the intervention of your divine powers. We ask you give us safe passage on our way home. Watch over us and protect us. We ask in thy holy name. Amen. Okay, have a good trip home, fellas.
Well, thanks again.
All right.